schizophrenia. Oh, I'm Kelsey Russell. I'm Annie Froelich.
Taylor Mitchell.
So we're going to start with the history of schizophrenia. I basically have a timeline here. The first documented case was in London in 1797. The person who had it was a tea broker, and he was sent to a psychological hospital for it. Dr. Emily Kaplan first identified schizophrenia in 1887, and it has been traced far back as the first millennium before Christ. Schizophrenia was first named dementia paradox in 1887 as well. Aristotle was a very well-known Greek philosopher who studied it in depth, schizophrenia. Greek mythology was studied throughout schizophrenia, and they believed that it was a punishment from the gods. Later, the Roman physician, Galen, expanded the Greek theories, and they thought it was, and they changed it from being blaming it on the gods to blaming it on Earth and other things. A Swiss psychiatrist, Eugene Buehler, in 1908 renamed the disorder because they thought that it was misleading, seen as it wasn't a form of just dementia. In 1930 is when the treatments began being offered by insulin-induced comas with electroshock therapy and with a lobotomy. In 1946, President Harry Truman signed the National Mental Health Act to conduct more research. I thought that was kind of an interesting little fun fact on there. In 1952, the first antipsychotic drug, chloromazine, was discovered. In 1959, German psychiatrist Kurt Snyder distinguished the symptoms and had a greater list of them. And then in 1989, the National Alliance for Research on Schizophrenia and Depression was formed. The FDA approved clozapine in 1989, and that was a drug widely used to help try and cure schizophrenia. In 2010, equal health insurance coverage was passed. It was called the Mental Health Parity in addition Equality Act. It was created equal insurance, mental and surgical services, and eliminating limits for people without mental illnesses so that they would be not conducted in the same insurance coverage. And then Simon Freud studied the influence of the schizophrenia and psychiatry in the 20th century, and he influenced the way schizophrenia was looked upon in the 20th century.
When being diagnosed with schizophrenia, they look for certain things. So somebody who had symptoms of schizophrenia would have delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and they would have grossly disorganized behavior and start to develop catatonic motor behaviors. When somebody has schizophrenia, they start to have a lot of disorganized thinking. So when they try to have a normal conversation with you, it can't really continue on, which is something that they call tangential thinking. So if you were having somebody talk to you who had schizophrenia and you said something with the word red, they would be like, oh, I saw a red light yesterday and I'm wearing a red sweater. And they would just keep on basing their conversation off of the color red. Individuals who show continuous signs of a disturbance, which is one of these 5 behaviors, they start to look at it, and if you continue to have these over a length of 6 months and then one symptom for a whole month, then you usually become diagnosed with schizophrenia. Is that right? Okay. When you have a delusion, when you have schizophrenia, which is, it's when you're thinking it's there, but it's not there. So you can either have a bizarre or a non-bizarre delusion. So an example of a bizarre delusion would be if they were thinking an alien took out their brain and then put an alien brain in there. A more non-bizarre one would be if they thought that they were just under observation by the FBI. When they have hallucinations, which is when they are seeing and like hearing things that aren't real, they start to hear voices, which describe situations that they're already in, or they convince them to do things that they usually wouldn't do, or they can warn them of dangerous environments. Often people with schizophrenia experience a lot of disorganized speech, which I talked about a little bit, which makes them really difficult to form sentences together properly. They start to experience grossly disorganized behavior, which may lead to difficult performing skills, so they can't really just do normal things, so they can't provide proper hygiene for themselves or make even just a simple meal. Sometimes they experience catatonic motor behaviors, so they'll be really distant from you and they'll start to have really rigid posture and resist even the slightest bit of movement. Behaviors that they experience are the ones before, and they sometimes experience absent or inappropriate emotional expression, is something they call it, which is when they become really uninvolved in just normal day activities, so they don't have any social interactions or like to come into any physical contact with people. They become really paranoid all the time because they refuse to touch things and they refuse to talk to people because they think that that would be bad. And they become really socially withdrawn, so it's really hard to communicate with them, and they lose interest in things that they care about.
Okay, so for the client we had, her name was Tammy, and she was a middle-aged woman who, as she grew up, she had trouble thinking clearly and had emotional behaviors that weren't appropriate for the time. So as she began to grow up, she became irritable, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on one thing, and her thoughts would jump around, and then she began hearing things, having anxiety and angry outbursts, and then she began to not be able to explain simple ideas and started acting more of a child. Later on, she went to a doctor who said that she had a severe type of schizophrenia, and she was put on the antipsychotic medication clozapine that decreased many of her symptoms, mostly the anxiety and the angry outbursts. And the medication had its own side effects, but she will be on this medication for the rest of her life. Any questions?
So how does it start? I don't know if I heard that, but is it from a family tree line or something where it comes into play, or is it just happens?
Well, I read a lot about heredity and stuff, and it can be passed down. There's if you have twins and a parent might have it, or might be a grandparent or something. One of the twins is 6% likely to get it, and that seems like a really small amount, but it's actually really great for how schizophrenia kind of gets passed down and how it kind of moves around.
So you're saying people have disorganized speech. So what if someone knew 2 languages? Could they start talking one of the other languages?
Probably. Yeah, it would be really weird. They would probably do it all the time. No? Okay.
Good job, Ronan.